Indeed, shocking statistics right there. Now, this formed the basis of a conversation I had just recently with Professor Mick Moore. He is an expert from the International Tax and Development Center that is in Brighton in the UK. And the questions I posed to him were mostly around what exactly this tax can do for Africa and just what we as Africans can do to stem the flow. Take a listen and see for yourself. On average, Africa loses upwards of 50, indeed 70, depending on who you ask, billion shillings every year to illicit financial flows. This, of course, is revenue that is lost in various ways, be it through taxation, tax avoidance, and various ways in which individuals and corporations engage in moving their money from one place to another. We want today to focus on the issue of tax and how this has been used to some advantage, of course, by some corporations to move their money and indeed hide revenue from Africa. This has been said to be upwards of about 160 trillion shillings over the past 36 years, that of course by different institutions, including the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And to delve into this issue further with me here in studio is Professor Mick Moore. He is from the International Tax and Development Center from Brighton in the United Kingdom. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, sir. Now, first off, when we talk about tax avoidance and the effect this has on Africa, what exactly would you say is the challenge here and how can we contextualize this for most people?
I think I would say two things. One is that there's a lot of tax avoidance in Africa, but it's very important to say that a lot of Africans, ordinary Africans, actually pay too much tax, not to anything like the Kenya Revenue Authority, but to a local council, to some traditional chief, to people who set up a roadblock throughout Africa. So that's one thing that you have to think of as well. A lot of people in Africa pay tax and they shouldn't. There are a lot of other people and organizations in Africa who pay far less tax than they should. And there's a real diversity here. In the first place, we have a lot of transnational corporations who have many ways of avoiding tax in Africa. And something has to be done about that, but it's very important in this context to say that to do anything about that is mainly an issue for the global community, or at least for the African regional community. Very hard for any individual African government to do much about that. So you've got that problem. And some companies are worse than others. There's a very big problem in mining in Africa, or companies not paying. There's a big problem in some countries in Africa of telecommunications companies not paying. Then you've got a lot of very wealthy Africans, and an increasing number of very wealthy Africans who don't pay personal income tax of any kind. And related to that, it's very important to remember, Africa, the economy of Africa is fast growing, cities are fast growing, people are moving in, property values in African cities are reaching some very impressive levels now. And the obvious way to get tax revenue without harming the economy and to tax richer people is to put a reasonable little tax on property.
I want to cut you off right there, and just so that we can unpack the issues here and take you right back to the beginning. When you said that a lot of Africans pay an inordinately high level of taxation, how do we balance that and the need for revenue for those local governments and the other sort of, formal and both informal organizations and governmental organizations that need that revenue?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, a lot of the tax that ordinary people pay in Africa, not so much in Kenya as in many other countries, doesn't do much more than pay the salary of the man who collects the revenue. So that, that is not productive at all. You're right, there is a big issue of local governments in Africa not having enough revenue. But, putting up a roadblock and then collecting money from people taking goods to market to pay someone's salary doesn't help with that. What you need is some more routinized system, and property taxes are quite a good way of doing this. So more organized property taxes for local governments, less roadblocks and other if you like unofficial kinds of taxation would be actually very good for a lot of people in Africa.
At the macro level, the same sort of situation where governments increasingly need to borrow. We're seeing a lot of African countries raising Eurobonds to finance themselves and their operations and other requirements like infrastructure. But the flip side of that is a lot of the individuals and corporations that should be paying these taxes are not doing so. Where is the catch here?
Well, you're right, and of course, the more that African governments can have a good, steady revenue stream from the large taxpayers, the easier it's going to be for them to borrow at good rates. And that is a new feature of the African economy over the last 10 years or so that we didn't see before. The amount of money that's not paid in taxes, including tax holidays and tax exemptions that frankly are not justified, don't actually do the economy any good, that is really big. It doesn't actually, you don't have to solve all this problem. You take a nice bite out of this problem, and the revenue problems for most African governments would be pretty much solved for the next 5 or 10 years. This is not an insurmountable problem.
So essentially what you're saying is that if we did get something like the property taxes right, especially at the higher end of the market, then we'd be able to start seeing a bit of results?
Yeah. I mean, I think two things are particularly important. Property taxes in capital cities, but they won't raise really big amounts of revenue. The easiest way, actually, to raise big amounts of revenue is to just give fewer tax exemptions. Because, well, we have a lot of different figures here, but some calculations suggest that on average for Africa, the amount of tax exemptions given to companies every year are something like a quarter of the total amount of revenue that's actually raised.
Wow.
So, you cut tax exemptions in half, and, you can increase your tax revenue by 12, 15 or more %, which is a big jump in a few years. So that, you could get a lot of progress if you could do something about that.
Yeah, we are a bit short of time, so I think we'll cut right to the quick. One of the most important and glaring factors of this whole conversation is the fact that a lot of African nations have little or no capacity to police the sort of issues that we are talking about.
Sure.
How then do they move forward towards developing this capacity?
Well, that is going to take a long time. I mean, there is real progress there. There's no doubt about that. But I think African regional cooperation is going to be really important here.
Yes.
Because, there are now an increasing number of tax experts in Africa are Africans going to other countries. Currently there are, I think, 4 people from Rwanda who are running the new revenue authority in Togo, and there'll be more of that. So there is more expertise across Africa, but it would be excellent, if African regional organizations could start to develop principles, for example, giving tax exemptions. Let African countries not endlessly compete against each other. Let's set some benchmarks so that, below that, governments will not give unnecessary exemptions. There's a lot to be done by regional organizations.
Finally, you talked about the issue of, at a global level, that there is a role to be played by, organizations such as the OECD and others who operate at a really macro level. What do you think is the way forward, especially in view of the fact that Africa is not usually involved in making these sorts of decisions?
I mean, I think, again, the answer here, regional cooperation. I mean, Africa plays a very small role in these international deliberations, and you can understand why, because most of the economy in the world is not in Africa.
Yes.
But if Africa were regionally well organized, and especially if Africa could then engage in discussions with countries like China, which are interested in this, let's put a bit of pressure on the OECD. Just don't accept what the global community wants to do, and say, well, if you don't change the rules to suit us, well, we might start making our own rules that will at least work for Africa and maybe work for Africa and China.
Okay. Thank you indeed for taking the time to talk to us, Professor. The conversation, of course, will continue, knowing, of course, that this is a developing issue and that it is of essence to a lot of Africans. That, of course, has been Professor Mick Moore. He is from the International Tax and Development Center, being here to talk to us about just what is happening in regards to taming the issue of attrition of revenue from the African continent, especially when it comes to tax and tax avoidance.